Hello, coaches. I would like to welcome all of you to this session discussing the intricacies of ICF Credentialing Exam. We like to respect your time and start this session immediately, and then we believe there will be more of our colleagues joining in as over 100 ICF coaches have registered for this. So as I begin, I would like to commend all of you for being here. The reason that you are here is because you are committed to professional development and you value being within an umbrella of professionals who work towards credibility and creating confidence, not only in ourselves, but also in our clients. I think it's such a noble intention that you are here to continue your growth and also continue to support your clients. So it's such a wonderful honor to be here with all of you and share this space. And also thank you for placing trust in me and Ignite Global. And my hope is to create packed value for you today. So as we begin, I would like to first share with you, probably there's going to be a lot of information in this session. So usually I love giving you a lot. So I would say, please, we are recording this session as you notice, and I will also be sharing the slides at a later stage with the video when it is released. So I would say you might need to take a step back sometimes later and revisit these slides and the recordings to go in depth. And I'll try to cover as much as possible within this 90 minutes. So once again, those who are joining, welcome again. Let's dive in, coaches, maximize our time. I would like to give a shout out to Renuka, Kate, and Penny. The coaches who are in our professional development programs requested this session. Initially, it was meant to be for the coaches in our network, and I thought let's open it up to the ICF community so that we can reach out to many of you and support you through your professional development. So with that, I hope that all of you gain value from this, and I invite you to keep your microphones turned off, but feel free to keep your camera on so that I can see all of your faces, I can see your engagement and so on. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat room so I can check and invite you to speak as well. When you are invited to speak, feel free to unmute yourself and come forward. So with the good hope of creating some deeper learning awareness towards how to ace ICF credential, understanding how to choose best and worst case scenario questions and how to face the exam with confidence. Let's dive in, coaches. And those who are joining in, welcome again. And it's a privilege to have all of you. So we are just about to begin the session. I hope I'm sharing the right screen. Yeah, I am, I believe. All right. Okay. So as we get started, coaches, as you're aware, Ignite Global is an ICF accredited comprehensive coach education provider, and we specialize specific niche specializations. At the same time, provide comprehensive credential support to the coaches and also therapists in their journeys to professional development. I see some of you are introducing yourself through the chat room. Please continue to do that and share your let's say your professional networks like LinkedIn so that you also can connect with each other. So let's dive in. So today our focus is to examine three specific sample ICF credentialing exam questions and explore what are the intricacies of choosing best and the worst case scenario. As you notice, through the years, ICF has been elevating the professional standard through all the evidence-based studies that are taking place every year. So I believe one of the reasons why the ICF credentialing exam is becoming complex, and if I may use the word challenging, is because we are increasing our professional capacity, right? When we say ICF, who is ICF? ICF is not an external organization. ICF is us, everyone within the ICF, except for those staff who help us with management, administration, logistics, and all of that. We are ICF, right? That means we are creating a higher standard for ourselves. And I think as professional coaches, we vouch for development and expansion. So I think it's very natural that we as professional coaches continue to expand our capacity and challenge ourselves. So let's approach ICF Credentialing Exam as an opportunity, and may I invite all of you to keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking, so that there won't be any interruptions. All right. Okay, so with that, let's dive in, coaches. Now, our agenda today is going to be the welcome and introduction. I think we have done that already. And since examining a question can take a little bit of time, I thought let's not overdo this process. So we will focus on 3 sample questions. And as you are aware, current ICF, the small iteration that ICF recently did, reduce the number of questions from 81 to 78. And you are aware, we need to answer these 78 questions within 3 hours. That means if we divide 180 minutes by 78, you have about approximately about 7 minutes to answer 3 questions. All right. So today I'm going to share with you sample questions in our website, so you have a quick look. And then I'm also going to share with you a Zoom poll so that all of you can look at the answers and capture the best and the worst case scenarios and then answer them in the poll. So we can get a feeling how many of you, how many of us were able to actually grasp the right answer, and this is done anonymously, right? And then moving forward, and then what I will do is let's explore criteria for identifying best and worst scenarios. I believe there is not necessarily like a right way or wrong way of doing this. We are all unique. We have different ways of approaching what we do. So this is not something that I'm necessarily handing over to you. Find out if it is something that you would find value in, and see whether you can apply it within your practice, and especially when you approach ICF credentialing exam. And then we will explore each question. We will go and look at each scenario and see how we identify what is best and worst. And then, of course, I'm also very happy to hear your insights, as well as find out, discuss any questions that you may have. All right. So coaches, to begin with, what I would do is in the chat room, I will be sharing with you now the link to the exam questions, right? Please open this link in your browser and start looking at the questions. Okay, I need to stop sharing. Here we go. Okay, so here we are. These are the questions. And as you open them, I will also open the poll, which will run for about 7 minutes, so that you have the time to first look at the questions and then grasp the answer, make a note, and then come back to the main Zoom room and then choose the best and the worst answers that you are identifying. So I think we could use a format like this for an example, right? So you could identify 1, 2, 3 and the best and the worst case. We initially thought of giving you access to our e-learning platform, but that would be complicated registering and going through the process. All right. Okay, so if you are able to access the page now, I will keep quiet so you can focus on the questions. And here is the poll. When you are ready, come and answer it. Wish you all the very best. Have fun. And I will see you in 7 minutes. If you have grasped some answers, I would say come and do the poll now, as we have exceeded 7 minutes. So I will keep the poll open for another 30 seconds. It's all right if you weren't able to address all of them, coaches. They're quite lengthy questions, but you can expect this kind of lengthy questions, some of them. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's end the poll. Yep. And then I hope that you have written down, noted down your answers somewhere. So let me share with you what I think are the answers, which I will be discussing with you. So these are the answers, right? I have very deeply thought about these questions and discussed with other ICF experienced coaches as well. So question 1, the best is B, worst is A. 2, best is B, worst is C. 3, best is D, worst is A. So have a look and see how it looks like for you. Let's discuss further so that you gain an understanding how it came to be. So what I will do now is share results. So we gain a little bit of an understanding collectively how we did it, right? So if you noticed, many of you, in fact, 11 of you thought the correct answer is B, which is accurate. And then the worst answer actually is A for the same question, but you notice that no one answered that. For the question number 2, the best scenario is actually B. You see many of you got it. And then the worst answer is C. Interesting. And then question number 3, the best answer actually is D. Some of you got it. And the worst scenario is actually A. All right, so you're noticing some interesting conundrums right there. All right. You might need a little bit more time, understandable. You might not have prepared to be here and take an exam. So it's all understandable. So it's not really a concern right now. What is important is recognizing where we are and what kind of preparation we need to be in. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at the exam is 180 minutes and there are 78 questions. That means you have about 2 minutes and 30 seconds to answer each question in average. So it's quite a task. It's understandable. And I think this is also the reason why many coaches find this exam to be quite challenging and complex. And we also hear this waves of coaches talking about it and the communities talking about it. And this effort is also because of that reason. All right, so now let's dive in, coaches, and I invite your attention carefully and make the best out of this experience. Let me make sure that I'm recording. Yes, I am. All right. Okay, so diving in, when we focus on the criteria for recognizing best and the worst case scenarios, as you know, there can be potential possibilities, most obvious things, right? The best acceptable answer, worst acceptable answer, and then something in between. It can be somewhat acceptable and somewhat not acceptable. So let's dive in further. I would like to share with you some of the steps in particularly how we will approach this today. And if you do not have a specific way of approaching ICF credentialing questions and their scenarios, I would say this might be one of them if it resonates with you, right? So how do I approach? This is one of the ways I would approach, right? So I would say read the question carefully and identify defining keywords. Now, as professional coaches, one of the strongest competencies, if not skills that we have is to be able to listen carefully and then identify keywords, one of the key elements of coaching. So I invite you to think about that. And then once you identify these keywords, accurately understand exactly what the question is probing as an answer. What is expected as an answer as well. The question in larger picture with keywords, and then what is expected from you. In other words, what is the best case scenario? Always anchor yourself to the best potential that can happen. And then I would say, form the question into a condensed one sentence, few short phrases in your mind. It's almost like you're creating a story. Like the one of the ways that I would like you to invite you to think about this is you create a picture scenario in your mind as you are listening to it. And let's do that so you get a better understanding. And then once you have you have understood the key words, the most important elements of the question, and then you narrowed it down to what is expected as the best case scenario, I think you have this condensed sentence already in your mind. And then the next step would be to carefully go through the each scenario, and I would say flag defining factors, keywords, focusing on worst possibilities. Now, this might be a quite unique approach. The best is quite easy to approach, and many of you say that. Many coaches who take the exam always say recognizing the best answer was easier compared to the worst. So focus on the worst keywords. It helps you very quickly separate the best answer from the worst answers most of the time. Doesn't mean that it can happen the other way around as well. I think in general, looking at this exam, if you focus on mostly the worst possibilities and recognize the defining factors and keywords for it to become worst, you might create a more efficient way of approaching it. And then isolate the most obvious best or the worst scenario. In other words, when you go through the questions, you will notice often you can pick the most of the time the best answer, as I mentioned, as many coaches also vouch for it. Sometimes the worst case scenario also can be easily understandable. The reason being, it could be so very obvious that something that we clearly don't do, right? So I would invite you to think about isolating the one of the answers first, right? As you go through the question, quickly try to identify how do I recognize the most intense one in terms of either worst or the best, so that then you are left with three options to weigh around and then recognize either the best or the worst. So most of the time it would be you are able to recognize the best answer, and then you are left with the three worst answers. And earlier we said focus on the worst factors and keywords. So weighing these worst factors and the keywords, you'll be able to quickly narrow down which might be the worst of worst, right? And then moving forward, and once you have done that, assess them, weigh them out of the three scenarios and try to narrow down to a specific answer that feels either worst or the best. And then you'll be able to isolate and recognize best or the worst answer. So that way you'll be able to quickly approach it. Now, if you check online, a lot of articles, a lot of YouTube videos, many sessions like this are being conducted. So I'm sure there are many tips being shared. Now, I don't want to go deep into tips because what we are doing is examining questions, but let's look at some crucial tips that we need to keep in mind as we examine questions as well. So one of the things I would say, do not get emotionally attached to the scenario. Do not get upset or too excited about it, or I wouldn't do this. Do not personalize it too much. When you do that, and also remember there's best worst, and then also partially correct, partially wrong. So if you start attaching emotionally yourself, you are physiologically changing yourself, plus when you physiologically change yourself, which is emotional energy, you're also affecting how your nervous system operates, so that you may have certain biases. So try not to emotionally get involved, right? So for an example, you read a question where it says, there's a new coachee and you are in a coaching engagement, and you have this romantic feeling towards the coachee, or the coach has romantic feelings towards the coachee, and the coachee invite the coach to go on a date, and the coach is aware that there's a romantic interest, but nevertheless, coach decides to go. We know all that. We all know that it's wrong. So knowing wrong is enough. If we got emotionally involved in that, so that you're starting to change. And during this exam, considering you have such a short period of time, you do not have time to fluctuate your energy, right? So do not emotionally get involved with the questions. Try to remain non-partial, non-judgmental. As coaches, that's what we always do. And always consider real world. Do not think about this exam as a student. Think always as a business professional setting, real world setting, if you are finding it difficult, may think about it from your mentor's perspective, educator's perspective. Think about it from a well-known, experienced coach's perspective. And also, if you find this exam difficult, it could also identify that you might not have enough real-world experience. It is also very important because when you get to PCC, you are expected to have a great deal of experience. And I believe many of the coaches who go through this exam, who are delivering real-world coaching, predominantly these 500 hours in real-world practice, usually find these exams to be quite manageable. And I also have spoken to coaches who have done predominantly reciprocal coaching or peer coaching within their 500 hours, tend to find it difficult. So you're starting to recognize sometimes coaching other coaches might not give you the opportunities to understand the real world scenario. So this also brings us a very important point to actually deliver real world coaching, because when we approach a professional credential, that means we are professionally delivering coaching, not continue practice coaching. I would say it is so very crucial you focus on MCC competency. Now, when you look at ICF core competency, there are only 8 competencies. And out of these 8 competencies, only actually 6 competencies are in the actual momentum. In other words, actual executions and embodiments are all condensed into 6 competencies. So it is definitely not rocket science. Even if you approach coaching from even if you look at the ICF core competencies from the MCC category, you will notice that there's a higher level of expectation from you as an MCC coach. So your focus need to be the MCC competency, even though you may be working towards a PCC credential. It's important. And I think that's also the reason why ICF just introduced the ACC credentialing exam separately, because ICF, through the experience, probably starting to realize that maybe for an ACC coach, having not explored MCC competence yet might be complicated. So I invite you to deepen your mastery so that you'll be able to approach this exam really strongly. And also, I would say, have a global mindset. We all come from different backgrounds. How we behave, operate within our ecosystems, cultural, business, societal, industry norms are different. And we need to keep in mind the coaches who created these questions, of course, did consider it was a large pool of coaches who came from different backgrounds. But at the same time, if you belong to a minority, so in my case, I am a minority. I come from Sri Lanka. I am brown skin. I belong to the LGBTQA community. So you can imagine I am truly a minority in the world, right? So the way I process and think about the world may be different from how others do. So it's very important that you have a global mindset. It's not just within your small community. How you deliver coaching will be applicable when you approach ICF exam. Be thoroughly familiar with the similar professions. Now, once when we had a conversation about the credentialing exam with a specific coach, and she told me, I was talking a little bit about therapeutic aspects that we need to know. So this specific coach told me, I'm not a therapist. I don't have to know it. I think that is not the right mindset. If there are certain other professions like therapy, mentoring, consulting, if they have certain similarities and differences, being aware of them well and understanding some of those practices can be valuable, because the coaches who created these exams have a much wider understanding of competence itself in comparison to other practices. So you having this awareness is crucial in order to be able to approach these questions. And I would also say, when you are in the exam, maximize your learning styles, which is many of us are different, like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, reading, writing. I don't have to explain any of these things. So for an example, today I'm using a visual way of learning because I'm a visual learner. So what I do is, usually when I read the question, I immediately put myself in an office building. I already have few rooms created in my mind. It's almost like a simulation is already in my mind. If it is a personal situation, I'm going to think about my home office. If it is a executive coaching situation, I'm going to think about this specific client's office that I usually work, a serene, nice office. And if they're talking about HR, if they're talking about a sponsor, I'm going to think about these people. So you have kind of characters. You already have the characters, the sets and everything. And when you're there, when you're reading the question, quickly align, like it's called anchoring, coaches. You're aware of this. You anchor the question into a real world scenario. So maximize your engagement and your depth of being able to grasp the question quickly. There are some questions in the exam, you will find they are shorter, and some questions are pretty much like what you just saw, they are quite longer. And I would say these few questions I shared with you is about 20 to 30% more complex than what you will see in the ICF exam, but doesn't mean that you wouldn't see these kind of questions. Often coaches who go through our practice exam say that the questions were very similar, the way it is structured, the content of it, and so on. All right, so if you are an auditory person who learns through auditory skills, try to find out what does that sound, what is that like, right? Kinesthetic reading and writing. Try to find out the best learning styles and create a way of dealing with it. Right, all right. And moving forward, there's a little bit of this unnecessary thing over here. Let me just get rid of that. I think it was copy-pasted by mistake. So now the next step, what I would like to do is to invite you to think about different criteria in order to recognize what is the best and the worst, right? What is best and the worst? How do we recognize the criteria? So here are some examples that you can use. Actually, there's no limit to criteria. You can use many different types of criteria. You will notice that there are many different types of criteria in terms of recognizing things as best and worst. So here's a few of them, right? So ICF ethical guidelines, obviously, violated, non-violated, unaware, or ambiguous. These are the possibilities. Violated means worst or not acceptable, right? Not violated means it's a plus, so it can be one of the best answers. Unaware means again worst, meaning coach is unaware of the ethical guidelines. Ambiguous. Ambiguous will put us in a space that we don't know, is this correct, wrong? So we'll have to compare it with another answer or the final answers in order to recognize, is it really the worst one or is it the ambiguous one? And then ICF core competency and best practices. Coaches, please remember when you approach the ICF this exam, it's not going to always directly communicate ICF competency, because how do we execute competency? Competency is a standard framework in order for us to measure our professional delivery. So although the questions are competency based, they're actually best practice oriented. In other words, the way how we implement the best standards is by delivering best practices. So you need to also have a deeper knowledge at MCC level, how MCC coaches use or what best practices do MCC coaches use. So it's very important. So whether you are executing them accurately, executed wrongly, or the coach altogether is unaware how to execute core competency or best practices. And appropriate experience level. Now, that is another thing ICF assessors very carefully listen to. Usually, when we assess performance evaluation as ICF assessors, we are able to recognize how much this specific coach has experienced actual real-world coaching within about 5 to 10 minutes very easily. Because if you look at a ballerina who has been dancing for 10 years, and if you look at a newcomer who started that day, they could do the exact same movement, a simple basic move, but you'll be able to identify that one of them is at the expert level, whereas the other one is a beginner, right? So you also need to demonstrate your experience as well. For those coaches who are applying for PCC credentials, so you are recognizing that there's an elevated level of competency and best practices and experience that you need to gain from the MCC perspective. That's what I meant. It's not rocket science. So sooner you acquire MCC level competency, best practices, and embodiment and gain experience through that, the more easier this exam is going to be. So for an example, the practice exam was created by one of our internal coaches within Ignite Global, Lux. So when she just did it immediately after a few weeks when it was introduced. So we didn't even have actually much resources to support her before she went to the exam. And many coaches were failing at the time and saying, this is difficult. So you would imagine Lux had a little bit of anxiety before she went into it. So as she took the PCC test, of course, she called me immediately after and she said, Fernando, it doesn't seem to be as difficult as everyone is saying. So I think this vouchers for the experience itself. Moving forward, actions or awareness stated, right? How does the coach takes takes actions. How is the awareness stated? Does it damage the client or non-damaging, unaware? Not limited to these possibilities. It can expand further, coaches. Coach's intention. So sometimes coach may have had an intention, a thought or an emotion. So it's important for us to check, was it visible, non-visible, regulated, non-regulated? So let me share with you a funny example, all right? So someone comes to you for a discovery session or a consultation session, and this person is extremely attractive. At the very first sight, you feel attracted, maybe a little bit romantically even. You feel a little bit attracted. Now, this is some level of an emotion that you created, maybe a little bit of thought around it. Now, coach may have had that thought, may have had that emotion. It's just like when you walk down the road, you may see attractive people and you may have some level of emotion liking this person. It doesn't mean that we have acted upon it, cheated on your partner or anything like that, right? It's an emotion that we can regulate. So it is also important to see, was the intention really visible? Was the emotion communicated? Is it regulated, not regulated? So there are also hidden elements. So you need to be very careful with the language that is being used. How about the effect on relationship, right? Coaching relationship here. Is it damaging? Is it empowering? Or is it non-damaging, right? So there are some areas that we need to focus on in terms of coaching relationship. Whatever that coach did it damage the relationship? And then application of judgment or empathy, which is a very big topic, very important topic in coaching. Again, judgment and empathy, not embodying the right empathy or projecting judgment could be damaging, either empowering or non-damaging, right? So you need to think about different possibilities as well. And action or statement, actions of the coach, statements of the coach, are they conclusive, non-conclusive? That means sometimes you may have made a statement. Within the statement, it is important for us to recognize, has this coach concluded it? Or is it a non-conclusive open idea coach is sharing? Another one, the number of violations. Often coaches say, both of them seem to be worst. I couldn't choose one. Then one of the things you can do is to see how many violations are there in this answer and how many violations are there in this answer. The one that has more violations tend to be the, of course, worst case, and the other way around tends to be the best case. And then moving forward, direction towards the answer. Sometimes what coach is doing may be right. What coach is doing may be right, but maybe it is deviating from answer further away. So that is problematic. Or maybe the answer is accurate and it is coming closer to the potential answer. So this is also important. I can go on all night, but we only have very little time, right? Only another 1 hour and 6 minutes. So I'm going to focus on moving forward. All right, so now let's look at the sample questions. Now let's follow this approach that we talk about. Excuse me. Let's do the same thing I said. So as you read through the question, you create visual awareness. At the same time, you're also identifying key factors and keywords, right? So let's see how I would do for this question. A new coach, it's going to be her very first long distance executive coaching session client. There's going to be a video conferencing call. All right, great. And then we have been told by the sponsor, the coach already have experiences and also turned down 2 external coaches because she found there wasn't enough presence. Coach wasn't present enough to the process. And now you or the coach thinks, should I take notes during the session? Is it necessary? Because when you take notes, it's almost like, rubbing your stomach and rubbing your head, right? It's difficult for us to do both at the same time. So it's natural, one would think, should I take notes? Should I not? Because it seems like presence is important. And then the coach thinks, in order for them to be able to maintain full presence, should I take notes? Should I not take notes? So this is the dilemma now. Right? So you highlighted keywords, you created a mental picture in your mind, and you disregarded unnecessary wordy explanations. Right? So what should the coach do? Now we have an understanding here. So now let's explore the answers. Once again, when you read the answers, we are looking at defining terms, key terminologies, right? So here, so this coach now thinks, coach is aware that ICF competency framework doesn't have note-taking as a competency. So you see my visual, someone note-taking? No, that's what the coach is thinking. So that's the red one, right? The red cross mark. And then continuing, he thinks, when I attended my classes, coach-specific classes, the MCC educator never took notes. So it might mean because it's not included, like note-taking is not a direct competency, yet it's a best practice. Coach may be now unaware of the best practice of importance of taking notes, although it is not in the competency. And emphasize, however, coach recognizes there's an emphasis on ICF core competency on coaching presence. So we are starting to recognize why he or she might be thinking that presence is the most important thing in this case. And then she thinks or he thinks note-taking being a coach-centered approach, because we would get this idea creating a note is for ourselves, right? For the coach's benefit, to find some keywords to repeat back to the client, go back, look at the goal, all that. So it's a coach, right? So you might feel like
session half an hour.
Rahul, may I invite you to keep your microphone muted, please? Thank you. All right. So moving forward, so often I also hear this interesting sharing in groups. People say, if the answer is coach-centered, it's a wrong answer. If it is client-centered, it's a correct answer. I think in many cases it can be true, but it doesn't mean that it's always true either, because there are many other parameters that we need to take into account. In here, note-taking being a coach-centered requirement actually is a wrong understanding. So we are starting to see two wrong understandings here. One is note-taking is not a competency, and emphasis on presence is important. So that's a plus point. And then thinking note-taking is a coach-centered requirement is also a wrong understanding. In fact, it's a best practice. It is to support the client, right? And then if you notice, so the coach thinks in this option, refrain from paying attention to the coach's process. Coach's process here is note-taking, rather focus on the client fully, because we know that this client expects a lot of presence from the coach. But then again, if you look at coaching presence, there are three key elements to coaching process. There are three key elements of coaching process. What are they, coaches? Presence for the client, in very basic terms, presence for the client, presence for themselves, coach themselves, and presence for the coaching process. In the simplest form, coaching process is a very, very important, large topic. But in the simplest form, there are three elements, meaning paying attention to selves, coach's process is also important. So then we are starting to recognize a third wrong component as well. So the number of times that the coach is getting this wrong, that this scenario is getting wrong, for an example, the coach decides to refrain from taking notes and aims to foster a more open and uninterrupted dialogue by not taking notes in this case and focusing on giving the full presence, not taking any note at all. But then you are recognizing with several mistakes made there, several unaware pointers, the coach is not clear about the best practices here in this answer. Moving forward to the next one. Ask the client for permission to take notes. Imagine yourself as a mason or a carpenter. You have a blueprint, you are supposed to build a furniture or a house. As you are building a wall, you are recognizing this wall will close the entire room if there is no door. Right? As a mason, would you on your own accord build a door because you think that the room is going to be enclosed otherwise? You wouldn't. What would you do? You would approach the landlord or the who contracted you and ask, hey, I recognize this. What do I do about it? And they would say, oh, we don't need a door there. Or they would say, oh, actually, you're right. Let's come up with a door, right? So when we don't know what to do with our clients, we are not in authority. We are in an equal position with our clients. So when we don't know what to do in the coaching process, we ask the client. So here the coach is conflicted. There's a dilemma. Should I take the notes or should I not, right? Simple thing that you could do is ask the permission. So if you notice, this looks like immediately the accurate answer, B. And many of you got this right for an example, because you can see this coach executed the best practice accurately. But we don't know yet, right? So we need to read all 4 to begin with, to go on. And the next one, coach is thinking of using AI technology to take the verbatim notes, and then also does not necessarily see the need to discuss this, because coach remembers in the contractual agreement, used technology may be used for the recording is included session. The technology may be used to record the session was included as a clause. So remembering that, somehow coach overlooks in informing to the client that I'm going to be using AI, right? So there, we cannot say that coach necessarily didn't do something right. Also, we couldn't say the coach did it right. Actually, if you look at ICF core competencies and ethical guidelines, we need to be transparent of everything we do. Well, the coach has been transparent to a certain extent. Of course, when the agreement was signed by the client, it's already mentioned, the agreement was signed. So that means the coach assumes that talking about this AI verbatim transcript is not necessary, but we recognize that now it becomes ambiguous, right? Did the coach really operate fully within the competent ethical guidelines, or is there some gap? Is there some ambiguity? So we are starting to recognize this can also be the best answer compared to asking, right? And the last one, try to take notes below the computer screen without losing eye contact with the client. Now here, having eye contact doesn't mean presence in any way, right? We cannot replace eye contact with presence. Presence is much broader term than maintaining just eye contact. So we are also recognizing, if you look at either the coach is unaware of the best practices or wrongly executing if they are secretly taking notes, right? Well, there's nothing wrong if you notice that, but coach could be more open. Coach could simply take the permission, for an example, rather than just doing things sneaky, right? Now, as you recognize, when we go through these 4 answers, you are starting to recognize, except for asking permission, all other answers have some level of ambiguity, not executing it right, or something like that. So this gives you that immediate realization. Here, the best answer is quite straightforward. So the best becomes the B. Ask the client permission to take notes when you don't know what to do. It's not just only applicable in taking notes, but anything else. Like sometimes when you're stuck in the coaching session, you shouldn't be stuck in any coaching session, because it's not your responsibility to be stuck or to be moving forward. But let's say you don't know what question to ask next. What do you do in a situation like that? You ask the client. You ask, all right, so this is the trajectory of our coaching so far. What would you like to do next? So the client tells you what to do, right? So that's again taking permission, asking the client. So if you are not fully comfortable with the permission, think about it as having an open dialogue with the client, identifying the best way to move forward. And we could use the word permission in this case. So now we identified the best answer. Now we have 3 answers to narrow down to. So let's move quickly. Moving forward, now we notice that AI technology, verbatim notes, it is ambiguous. We cannot necessarily say it is fully wrong or it is fully right. There is some level of ambiguity. So we need to compare this with the next potential worst answer. So the next potential answer would be this one. So now we take these 2, right? It doesn't matter which order you do that. You take one worst answer and then you take another one, and then you compare these 2 and you pick the most worst one, the worst one out of the 2, right? And then you compare that with the remaining answer, so that you'll be able to identify the worst of all out of these 3, for an example. So ambiguity is the problem in the previous one, and in this one, coach believes that they need to, in order to be fully present, shouldn't take notes at all. That means they are unaware of the competency to begin with, unaware of the best practice, and then they also think they've understood coach-centered requirement wrongly. That means they also understood coaching presence wrongly, and they also made the wrong decision to begin with. Now there are 3 to 4 elements in this answer. We can clearly see that coach is either unaware or not executing the experience and the best practices in the best possible way. So when that happens, we compare that with ambiguity. Now, what is worst? Having some ambiguity in the ethical guidelines, although to certain level it has been complied, or there are several mistakes, unawareness in the coach. So I know that you are weighing more towards this specific answer being several mistakes, several areas that coach is not fully able to demonstrate the coaching skills, right? So that means A becomes now the worst out of these two now that we observed. Now we have another one. So let's compare this answer about four different mistakes with the last one, which is try to take the notes below the computer screen. Well, like I said, there's nothing wrong if the coach took the notes while providing full eye contact. Maybe this coach is able to do shorthand typing, right? We don't know. At the same time, if you notice here, maybe the coach is unaware. The best answer could be checking in with the client, taking the permission from the client. So we are starting to recognize either coach is unaware or wrongly executing this potential best practice while there's a good opportunity, which is much better. Then we need to ask again about these 3-4 mistakes the coach made with the previous answer. And here, not being able to execute the best practice. If you compare these two, which one again seem to have more misunderstanding, more unawareness, more mistakes being made? It tends to be A, if you notice coaches, right? So with that, we can recognize when we compare side by side each scenario, we are recognizing. So there you are, the worst answer becomes A. So I believe you may have some questions, you may have some dilemma. So I invite you to note it down and very carefully process. You still have the answer, so continue to do that. I thought we would take questions first, but maybe let's do that at the end, encompassing all 3 questions so that we make sure that we do what we intended to do today. If you have any questions, why is that? But your understanding is something else, all fine, right? We explore them. For now, please park it somewhere and later on feel free to ask and also double check your argument or your understanding or your experience, right? So moving forward, this question is quite lengthy as you can notice, right? So this is Fatima, recently promoted senior executive, right? So we are recognizing and you now, you're going to be you directly, right? So this is you. You are the external coach. Focus is leadership development, right? So she exudes this confidence in her normal day-to-day behavior, and she's excited, enthusiastic about her new role. So you have this all in your mind now, where you are meeting this client, you can close your eyes and you see it. This is what's happening in my world. And I'm curious to find out how you would create that. Right. And then it's a regular coaching, second regular coaching session, right? So it's a new coaching session still, very new. You know only about 2 hours worth information, maybe even 1.5 hours worth information. You might not know about the client fully. So we need to make a point about that. And the coach wants to actively implement some leadership initiatives, but at the same time, somehow, when she tries to do that, she experiences some level of anxiety. And when that happens, usually anxiety is a somatic experience. Anxiety is a physical, we can feel anxiety physically. So as a professional coach, you are aware the moment that happens, you tap into client's emotions, the electromagnetic movement in the body. That means you invite the client to recognize their somatics, their somatic awareness. As you do that with the client, maybe the client said, there is some level of the closeness in my heart. And I experience this closeness in my heart as some level of anxiety. All right, so then you have come to understand that client is experiencing somatically an anxiety, and when we feel it somatically, that means it's real. It's not just cognitive, right? It's more it's more ingrained within ourselves. But see the language used here. Anticipates. Maybe the reason for this situation can be some extreme strict parents, the way how they parented this coachee. right? She feared punishment, judgment, and being perceived as unworthy or unloved. So she thinks, she imagines, or she speculates that this might be one of the reasons, because when she focuses on her heart sensation, it connects her to something from this strict parenting. But there is no conclusion here. It's not conclusive because we don't know yet. In fact, as a professional coach, we don't have the enough tools to conclude it either. So if we don't have the tools, client definitely doesn't have the tools. Now we know that much, right? And then you, however, as a professional coach, recognize that this is deep-rooted somehow, right? You can imagine maybe this is a deep-rooted fear that might be triggering the anxiety. So you have come to understand that. Now you are kind of aware of the situation. You have the picture in your mind. You have the story in your mind just by identifying the key factors and creating a story very quickly with the most important keywords. And then what is the question? What are they asking? What is ICF asking? Support Fatima's development. How do you continue to develop Fatima? At the same time, maintain the professional boundaries. All right. So we understood the situation. We understood the question. All right. So what this means is, as you are reading through this question, you need to very quickly process this information and then create this story and make sure that you got the essence of the question, although the question can be lengthy. So moving on to the answers, coaches. So I'll invite you to read the first one and have a glass of a sip of water. Continuing. So the coach not qualified to address the past adversities, which can borderline with trauma, for an example, childhood adversities, which are specific mental health realities, let me say, mental health conditions, right? So it is true. Now, when this coach is not qualified, shouldn't address past adversities, correct. Now, these are not worse, great. Maintain a neutral stance, which is important, which is also another plus point. Great. Advice. The word advice shows up in the coach's world. That's uneasy for us because we don't advise. The word advice doesn't exist in the world of the coach. So there is a red flag, right? So we say there is a possibility that this might not be the right answer because we just kind of finding out a keyword that is not in the positive direction. And then advise Fatima to seek therapy and address these adverse childhood experiences immediately after the coaching session. So it's almost like coach is saying immediately after this session, you have to meet a therapist. So what is your comfort level? A client mentions they may have had some past experiences that they may have developed some anxiety. They are speculating it and they're telling you that this might be a reason. And it can be true. Would you quickly step on your feet and say, you need to see a therapist immediately? I think that's not the first thing to do, right? There are other more important things that we need to do, right? And then the coach would say this gently but firmly. Again, saying it firmly, advising firmly raises another red flag. So you're almost kind of seeing two red flags already here. And also saying, find the root causes of their anxiety with a qualified mental health professional. Now, this to a leader who is an organization who has been offered coaching to expand their leadership, all of a sudden, the coach comes in and saying to the second coaching session, you should go and see a therapist immediately after this. You might have some root causes of mental health problems and address root causes. This anxiety might be something to do with mental health, right? So that might be damaging to the relationship right there, right? So we are starting to recognize this is more towards not acceptable side. Now, before we move forward, what would you do in a situation like that? Client is talking about anxiety, maybe related to a past experience, and the client's purpose is to move forward with coaching. What would you do? Before we create a dialogue, a shared dialogue between the coach and the client to find whether client needs to see a mental health care professional, right? We need to have that dialogue, the shared dialogue. That's how we enable the client to arrive at the decision whether they want to see a mental health care professional or not, right? That means some level of exploration is needed. We don't jump into conclusions too quickly because it can damage the relationship to begin with. So how do we approach then this discussion? How do we own this dialogue, shared dialogue? What happens in the shared dialogue? I think the next answer provides some substance there. So support Fatima by further inquiring. Don't jump quickly, right? Further inquiring. Connect between her past experiences. Connection between her past experiences. Primarily focus being her present challenges. Because as coaches, we are unable to primarily focus on the past experiences. That needs to happen with the therapist, a mental health care professional, the past exploration. But we can primarily focus on the present challenges. In fact, are you aware that this is an MCC competency? Are you aware? Have you read this? The primary focus of the coaching session should not be the past and should not be in the emotional past. Because then if it is primarily in the past, we are operating in the therapeutic mode. So that would be wrong. But here you are recognizing this coach is aware. I can explore some level of past, but I should primarily, predominantly need to focus on the present. Now, this connection helps the coach and the client to both recognize how deep-rooted this problem might be, right? With that, coach invites the client to a reflective exploration. Coach doesn't prescribe. Coach doesn't advise. Reflective explanation. Sounds about right. And then moving forward, identify specific behaviors. You see, not about emotion. The focus isn't about emotion, because if it is emotion, then we are in the therapeutic mode. But if you focus on the behavior, it is what is expected from us. For an example, ICF core competency number 8. Number 1, subcompetency under 8.1 MCC competency is that coach enable the client to derive learning through what? Do you remember this competency? 8.1 MCC competency. Are you aware? If you're aware, you know this already, which is the wider worldview and behavioral change. So the coach focuses on behavior. So we immediately recognize this coach has a very good understanding of MCC competency and best practices immediately. And then explore whether possibility of consciously addressing this challenge through cognitive processes would enable the resolution. And that's exactly what we're supposed to do, isn't it? Because coaching is a cognitive process predominantly. If the coachee was able to address this situation, focusing on preliminary current situation, revisiting the past appropriately, client might be able to resolve the problem cognitively without an unconscious change, which is therapy. Unconscious change is therapy, right? So it is important before we invite the client to see a therapist or refer the client to a therapist, we first recognize the cognitive process and see whether the client is able to resolve the resolve the specific challenge, right? So you are starting to recognize everywhere you see green lights, green signs. So this sounds like the best case, like what we always, most of the time, are able to recognize. So this is an empowering way of working with the client, right? This empowers the client to create a reflective conversation. Moving forward. So that's almost like the correct answer, but we don't know yet. Acknowledge according to ICF ethical guidelines, professional coaches are not qualified to delve into past experiences. True that. Okay, green light, amazing. So to fulfill your obligation, see the language, informing Fatima and her sponsor that the situation may be better addressed by a therapist. Right? But you say this
violation of ethical.
Hyro, do you mind if you keep the microphone muted and we talk about any insights, questions later, all right? Okay, so moving on, you would say with the empathetic demeanor, focusing on Fatma's well-being, but at the same time, what is the biggest red flag here? I think probably you're identifying the obligation to inform Fatima and the sponsor immediately. What have we done? We have violated an ICF ethical guideline, right? It's not our job to go and inform the sponsor. In this case, it could be HR department. It could be one of the executives or the team leader, or it could be the learning and development department. We don't inform the learning and development or HR department that the client might need a therapist. That is devastating to the client. So we immediately damage. So here you see two actions. So awareness is damaging. The action here, if the coach took this action, it would be damaging to the client, talking to the sponsor. It's Fatima who needs to talk to the sponsor if necessary. It's not the coach's responsibility. And then also you're recognizing there are numerous violations. And then this is going towards the worst case scenario as well, right? So now we have a understanding of C. Let's look at the D before we actually start to narrow down. Fatima not explicitly indicating that she requires therapy. It's not coming from Fatima, right? So coach thinks, let's continue. Since Fatima isn't aware or unaware whether this is needed, therapy is needed here or not, let's continue to do the coaching with the good hope, with the belief that client may manage to overcome her anxiety within the next few sessions. It's not necessary to stir the pot. Sometimes culturally we are like that, depending on the cultural context, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes people don't want to see certain things, and we call this disassociation in psychology, right? So we might even be disassociating from this possibility because we may be of anxiety. So we may not want to get involved, right? So we may just pretend like we didn't see it, but we know that it is not ethical. It is not executing like
expiry date bari check.
right there. Hi, Krishna. Can you please keep your microphone muted? Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
No
I'm
worries.
really-
It's all right. Okay, so as you're recognizing that there are many multiple red flags again, right? And then continuing on. So we are recognizing now, if you compare these four different contexts, we are recognizing that inviting the client to further inquire and preliminarily focus on the current challenges and see whether the client is able to cognitively, through a cognitive process, resolve this and create success seems to be the best answer in this case, right? So that's where the B comes to play. Now let's compare the other three, which tends to be the potentially the worst, right? So if you look at the first one, acknowledge that according to ICF ethical guidelines, a professional coach is not qualified, and then tell the Fatima and their sponsor that Fatima needs a sponsor. We know that this is direct violation of ethical guidelines, right? So, well, we know this wrong. Now we check this against the next one. Now, it's actually, if you look at answer A, is very similar, except that in this answer, A answer, you're only telling Fatima to immediately take action and go see a therapist. So it's both violating, it's both not appropriate, but saying it to the Fatima's supervisor or the sponsor and Fatima both is more violating or more serious than only telling Fatima. Both are not right? Not acceptable. But the second or the previous answer is actually worse, right? So now it enables us to narrow it down. So we move to the next one, which enables us to, okay, sorry, which was the other one? Oh, the last one, we pretend like we didn't notice it, right? And that is also not good. But again, what is worse between these two? Pretend like we didn't need to talk about a therapist or explore that further there. We just continue the coaching session in the direction that would move forward, and then telling the sponsor that Fatima needs a therapist, right? What is worst? I think it's quite straightforward and obvious that it does more damage to the client saying that Fatima needs a mental health care professional to the sponsor than continuing the coaching engagement, right? So now with that, you are starting to recognize then very easily with that, we are able to recognize that worst answer is bringing in the sponsor and then also the Fatima that they need a therapist. So there you are. And in this case, you see the multiple violations are not limited to. There are many more in here. I'm just trying to maximize the time considering the limited time that we have. So let's look at the last question, and also we will take some questions after that. So there's a new client waiting for us. It's an organizational client, first coaching session. Intricate narrative. The client is sharing with you an intricate, like very sensitive, very little details narrative with a wide array of personal and professional context. Client is telling you a story, has personal, professional, it's quite intricate and it's got wide array of things, a lot of things. This is the kind of client you say, talking too much, going in cycles, right? We have seen clients like that. So we are talking about a client like that. And then the coach find it difficult to grasp the central theme. What is client really trying to address here? Excuse me. What is client really trying to address here? The central theme. And then, and with this complexity and the breadth of their sharing, coach is struggling now. So now that we understood the situation, right? I can see like myself being there in front of someone talking. I'm not sure what is going on. I'm like flabbergasted with what is going on, right? It's very complex. I'm unsure. So I need to think myself, what would I do in this situation? But before that, what is the question asking me? So the recognizing the needs to distill and understand the core aspects of the client's narrative. Accurate, right? Because if the client is talking too much, saying a lot of things, in order for us to move forward, it's important, crucial that we first understand the core aspects by distilling this whole story, right? So the question is actually probing us towards that. How would the coach proceed adhering to ICF core competencies to understand the core aspects? So the question is demanding distilling and understanding the core aspects. So moving forward, now let's look at the answers. Express gratitude. So by saying thank you and I'm glad that you shared this with me, something like that. And then coach says, thank you for sharing these details, things about you, aspects about you. If I understood you correctly, it seems your main concern revolves around XYZ, those things client is selling. Did I hear you correctly? Is there anything missing or what else do I like to add? Now I know you're sitting there and having this expression almost like, why is this coach asking so many questions in the same question? Because you know that at PCC level, very strictly, if you incorporate many observations, different elements, and then ask multiple questions in the same question with few other defining markers, your performance evaluation could end up resulting in not receiving a passing score because of multiple questions. Even at ACC, ICF specifies this now very clearly. Earlier, ICF used to kind of tolerate this, but as an assessor, I can confirm that now, if even in the ACC recording, if there are several times these multiple questions, complicated questions coming out with several questions in the same, that becomes problematic. So that is number one. We recognize some red flags already. And on top of that, do you recognize, instead of going towards the answer, this exploration, this way coach is taking, actually deviating from what is needed. Remember, the question is distilling the focus, the main theme. Coach, first of all, spent a lot of time. Client spent a lot of time telling a long story. And then what did coach do? Coach went on to tell the same story one more time. On top of, client has taken a lot of time and a lot of confusion. And coach himself is confused, the question said. So how can we provide a summary, right? And then on top of that, coach is asking multiple questions and inviting client to give more. That means it's almost like lighting the gasoline, because the client is going to talk more now. So it is contradictory, it's counterintuitive. So we are starting to recognize multiple areas of red flags immediately in this answer. It's not helping, it's not going in the right direction. So you made a mental note. And moving forward, now address the complexity of client's narrative, inviting a more focused discussion. But how does the coach do that? Your story contains many layers. Great. Green flag. Coach is good at summarizing or recapping or providing a bit of feedback. Could we perhaps concentrate more on aspects immediately related to the matter at hand? It's our responsibility to focus on intended professional focus. What is happening here? Now, what is expected from us in first place? Narrowing it down, distilling it, and helping us to find the main focus. But what is happening here? Instead of finding the main focus of what client said, coach is saying, if I say it with an example, if you have a coaching plan, today in this coaching session, we are supposed to be talking about this specific subject. Why don't we discuss this matter at hand? Because I am obliged, based on this corporate engagement, to focus on professionally. Ambiguous again, right? It might be appropriate in some cases, and in some cases, especially if you have a very strict contract with the organization that you only can discuss these elements and only that. But we don't know that here. But at the same time, if you ask an MCC, usually you stay with the client in the moment, what is most important to the client, provided that it is valuable to the larger goal that we are trying to achieve. So as an MCC, one would not shy away from exploring some personal elements if it is affecting clients' professional development, professional achievements, and so on. We wouldn't necessarily need to go into their personal life and then completely deviate from the coaching. But at that very moment, if we told the client, let's focus on matter at hand because we need to be professional, then we are leading the client. That means we decided the goal for the client rather than carefully listening to the client, helping the client to narrow down, and client identifying that let's focus on the matter at hand because I want to focus on professional focus, right? So you're starting to recognize again a few red flags you are noticing here. Moving forward, encourage the client to distill their narrative into essential elements. How does the coach do that? It sounds great. How does the coach do that? Considering the depth of your story, could you identify the keywords and elaborate them with some examples? This will help us ensure we are aligned our understanding. This keywords is great, but elaborate and more examples, client is already telling us a long story. So if we told the client to elaborate, client is going to blow it up. And more examples means more blowing it up, right? So although aligned in our understanding is a great intention, we are not necessarily doing that. Again, counterintuitive. If you note it, the direction towards the answer is deviated. Instead of going closer to what is required, which is narrowing down, distilled, at the same time recognizing the client is able to tell you central theme, the most important. What is the most important thing to discuss? What do we do? By inviting the client to share samples and elaboration, we are going away from this expectation. So we are deviated from actual goal. Again, few red flags you are recognizing, coaches. Right, the last one, request concise recapitulation, which means that we invite the client to create a summary and provide us the most important piece of what they want to address, right? So we could say you have covered a broad range of topics, including range of personal and professional matters. Could you bottom line the sharing in a few sentences? This is a direct ICF competency. So immediately recognize, actually, we need to distill, recognize the main theme, which means bottom lining here is the most important. And can you say that in few sentences in comparison to examples, elaborations, things like that, right? So you are starting to recognize coaches aware the importance of bottom lining and sharing it from the few sentences, letting the client still lead, allowing the client to find what is important, not getting involved, professional, personal, or anything like that, because when we do that, we are already making a judgment about what client thinks, what we think the client should be doing, right? So obviously then looking at the other three ambiguous, also somewhat deviating from the answer, we are recognizing that D is actually the accurate answer here. So the best answer here is the D, quite obvious. Now, of course, we have to identify the worst one, right? So in order to do that, now when we encourage the client to distill and understand the essential elements, but if we told them to keyword and elaborate, so we are going away from, so we know that this is not right. So let's compare this with the next answer, which is address the complexity of the client's narrative by suggesting more focused. So the matter at hand, the matter at hand. Now this is different. One answer is deviating from the question and inviting the client to keep doing the same thing. And the other hand, although there's a nuance of coach leading somewhat the client to recognize the matter at hand and the intended professional focus, you notice that this is somewhat gathering the client to distill, kind of driving the client towards a specific, a focused alignment towards what to be discussed. One is going away, the other one is leading a bit, but at the same time, it's bringing the client towards this main focus. So what would you consider the worst one here? I think in order to do that, we need to also look at the previous one more time, right? Asking the client to identify keywords is good. Asking the client to elaborate, one red flag, some examples, another red flag, and saying, let's ensure that we are aligned in our understanding. Is coach clearly communicating here? Also not. Because when you elaborate and share more examples, we are going away from it. So we are not clearly communicating and we are moving away from the actual outcome we are expecting. So there are about 4 red flags here. And then in this answer, there's a red hand of asking the client to focus on immediate and then responsibility, which are 2 red flags. At the same time, we are inviting the client to focus on the intended professional focus. So you're noticing that it's bringing the client into the closer to the expected outcome, but there are 2 red flags compared to the other one. There are many red flags. So we are starting to notice that inviting the client to explore is actually contradictory to what question is asking. So that becomes the worst answer. And the last one, if you now compare one more time, if you remember, I had all my fingers open when I discussed this, right? If I understood you correctly, if I share this with you, aspect of your life. So taking so much space from the client, right? It's just like we are repeating something that is not useful. And that's why we are trying to distill. So one red flag. And then you're inviting the client, this XYZ things that you're not clearly communicating because in first place, you didn't understand it. I hear you correctly, one question. Anything missing? Another question. What else? Another question. Anything to add? Another question. On top of that, we are now growing what client is saying further and further. So in comparison to few deviations from the previous one and compared to this one, you are starting to recognize that this one has so many more red flags compared to the other one, which means that the worst answer becomes the A in this situation. All right. So that's how, at least my perspective and the coaches that we have been discussing these answers with came to the conclusion of this, right? So now I would say, as we come to an end of this session, where we have another 7 minutes, if you have any burning questions or insights, I would like to invite you to share. I also see like a lot of questions. Okay, so I'll go with the last question that I have here to make it fast, all right? I may have missed it. Can you help me understand the wisdom behind A being the best answer to the first question? Some book authors who are MCCs are saying you should not take notes in a session. So they may be wrong, aren't they? Well, we like now thank you for this question. It's a very valuable question. Now, when we approach coaching competency and best practices, we don't base ourselves on what some people say. We need to base ourselves on the facts, the competency, right? There may be few MCCs who don't take notes, and I'm one of them. In fact. I don't take any notes. At the end of the session, I make some notes because I have a lot of experience and I can do that naturally, having delivered over 6,000 hours of coaching and therapy. But this comes to you with experience. And if I, as an MCC, if I told a coach who has 20 hours of experience not to take notes, I am damaging the client. If you notice, I'm damaging the coach. I am putting the coach in a really a place that may not serve the client, right? So it is so very important to make sure that we are based on the the competency itself, right? So we need to keep in mind, why do we take notes? We take notes because we are human beings. We are not perfect. So if we have an expectation from a coach, let's say an ACC applicant, not to take notes, what are we aspiring for? We are aspiring for perfection. We need to expect an ACC to be perfect. I am not perfect. Sometimes I have had instances, I'm ashamed to say this, without taking notes, there had been moments I forgot. I had to ask, can you please tell me that again? Has happened before, right? So that means it is not a definitive thing, although some MCCs would say we might not have understood them in that right context fully. So I would say if someone is saying a coach from the very beginning shouldn't take any notes, it would be false statement to begin with. Taking notes is managing your coaching presence and the adaptability with your client. You are able to manage your presence in such a way that you have gained a lot of experience. You know what keywords to take. You know how to arrange your notes in a way. You know how to do it while maintaining your eye contact. That is what we call mastery. Not completely saying no to certain things, right? So I would say this statement might be taken out of context, provided that there is no such rule or competency framework or fast and fast saying that we shouldn't take notes. And I think that's not practical simply. All right. In question 1, Renuka is asking, if in C, AI was not included in the agreement, would it be unethical? Now, the thing is, when we say like the technology will be used to record the session, maybe used to record the sessions, we have broadly told the client that we might be recording, but we may not have specified that we will be using AI. Is it unethical? Well, if the client signed the contract, there's some level of responsibility for the client also to find out, is it video recorded? Is it audio recorded? Is it verbatim recording of the sharing, the conversation, right? It's some level of client's responsibility as well. But at the same time, if I focus on best practices, if I am recording verbatim transcript, I will tell the client. I think it's important. It's transparency, it's clarity, it's open communication, it's respecting the client and all of that. Because I'm thinking from my perspective, I'm going to work with a coach or a therapist. Okay, there's a clause in the contract that says the technology may be used to record. What if this therapist or the coach used an AI client or an AI technology that is bleak, that is not that we can trust, that's trustworthy? So I would want to know, okay, if you are recording my sessions, what software do you use to record? Where do you store them? How would you discard them? I will become curious. So as a coachee or a therapy client or a patient, if I wanted to know that, I would naturally understand my client would want to know what technology I would be using, right? So I would naturally say that. So there's some level of ambiguity. Coach, like, this is what I meant by there's a thought, it's unseen. That means coach might not necessarily mean to do any harm, but coach might also not have thought about in depth, right? So it's bleak. The situation is not strong. So it's ambiguous. We can say it is 100% accurate. We can say it is 100% wrong either. But we know that it is not the best practice. It's not the best way to operate as a professional coach. All right. So coaches, I really, really value your time, and I like to start things in time and end things in time. As we are ending the 90 minutes, I would like to say thank you so very much for being in this session. And if you have any further inquiries, if you are not agreeing, if you see something that I didn't see, we didn't see, because that can happen, feel free to send us an email and explain what you thought. And we'll be more than happy to explore further and share some updates with all of you, depending on the kind of feedback you provide. So I hope I created some value for you. I hope that you found value within these 90 minutes. I wish you all the very best in approaching your credentialing exam, and wish you all the very best, coaches. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend. Oh, sorry. It's already about Monday. Sorry, I am a lot going on today, and I look forward to co-creating with you in the future. Wish you all the very best, especially acing your ICF credential. Bye for now. Thank you.